Hey everyone, it's Jim. In my last video, I set up a simple system that you could use to create your own deck of playing cards. And in this video, I wanted to continue to develop that project to show you how you could use it for your very own trading card game prototype. And since we last left off, I made a few updates to the project, so I'll just talk through what all those changes are, but I'll start with a demo. And when we start our game, we can see our deck of cards there. And when I click it, the card flips over and we see that we have this image of a lightning mage of some sort, and we see some values that could represent an attack and defense or attack and health values. When I click the next one, we can see that it's a fire mage with different values. And then we have this warrior. And then the last card is this spear warrior. So let's just talk through how that all is working. And I think the best way to do this is to start with the card and the changes there, and we'll kind of work our way backward. So in the card, I didn't change a lot. And if you remember, we had created this widget when the card is spawned and we were passing in the suit and the value for that. I've just renamed those to attack and health. And then I have this struct that is holding some information on the card. So I have a card name, an attack, a health, and the image that I want for the card. So I'm passing in the attack and health, and I'm setting that to our widget that holds those values. And then here in my construction script, I'm getting my mesh. And if we look at this card mesh, we can see that it has 3 different materials on it. And specifically, I want this material slot 2. This is our card front, or the face of the card where the art would be. So I'm getting my material slot 2, and I'm creating a dynamic material instance on element slot 2 of that material. And what this create dynamic material instance node does is it allows us to change the material during runtime of the game. So this is how we're able to update the art on the card on the material instance. And on my card front, I've used a texture sample node, and I've set that as a parameter that I'm calling card art. And then from this material instance that I'm creating, I'm setting a texture parameter value of the parameter card art. And again, from that card info, I'm getting the card image and passing that in as the value for the parameter. So that's all the changes I've made to the card so far. And if you remember from the last video, we were using the game instance to spawn the deck of cards. And I've just made a couple changes here. Instead of passing in the value in the suit, I'm just passing in my card info struct so that each card can have its own card info. And I'm getting that from this array. And if you see here, this array is coming from my game instance class. So in a game like this, you may want to have some type of deck building mechanic or a screen where the player can choose which deck they want to use. And you would want to probably store that information in the game instance class because this persists between levels. So the player can choose the deck they want and have that stored on their local computer. And then when they go to play against an enemy, which will usually involve changing levels, we can pull that information back out of memory. So on my game instance class that I've made, I just have a variable called chosen deck. And we can see here that these are the 4 elements of that. So 4 cards. We had our lightning mage, our fire mage, our hardened warrior, and our spear warrior. So on our game mode, I'm just getting a reference to my game instance, and I'm getting that value of chosen deck. And then for each card in the deck, I'm spawning a card, and we're passing in that card info struct for each of the cards that we're spawning. So if we wanted to, we could add some more cards to our deck. We could add another lightning mage, and I'll make sure to set those values the same, pick the right image texture, and we could see that we're prone to error. So we have to make sure for every card that we add to this array, we get it exactly right. But we can see that since I've added another card, now I should have 5 cards, so the lightning mage, and then a second lightning mage, and then some additional cards. And we could use a data table. So I did set up a data table with the 4 cards that I defined, and I can set the row names to be the name of the card. And then when I go here, I can say table row, get data table row, and our card list, and then we can select whatever card that we wanted from that list. So you could use like a card ID or something, and then we can add that to the chosen deck if we wanted to. And we could make our deck this way. So you could write some type of algorithm that gets each of the rows from the data table and passes them in and adds them to the struct. And this is how you create your deck. But regardless of which way you do it, it could get pretty messy. And depending on what your game is, you may not even need all of this extra steps. And so I don't really think that a struct is the right tool for the job. I think this is a great chance to learn about data assets. So what is a data asset? Well, a data asset is a type of object that we can create in our Unreal Engine project. And because these are objects, they exist as standalone files. Now, this allows us to have better organization of those files, and we can edit them directly instead of needing to store the data somewhere else, like a data table or in a blueprint. And because each data asset is going to be its own file, this is going to be much easier when you're trying to handle large amounts of data within a team. So each member of the team can be managing their own data assets. And one thing I really love about data assets is they support direct references to other project assets. So let's go ahead and set up a system in our game using data assets. Now, similar to when we create a struct, we define all the variables. We also need to do this for our data assets. So let's start by creating a new blueprint class. And if we go to blueprint class and then type data asset, we can see that we have this primary data asset that we can choose here. So let's click this one, and I'm going to call this P for primary data asset, and then I'll call this card info. And let's open this up, and what we see is it looks like pretty much any other blueprint. Now over here, we can assign some variables. So let's create a variable called card name, and this can be text. Let's create another one called attack, health, and card art. And so far what we have is the exact same scenario that we had with our card info. We have our card name, attack, health, and card art, which is the same thing that was on our struct. But now we can create an individual data asset for each of our cards. And I'm gonna keep these all in a folder called data assets, and I'll pull my card info into there. And then I'll create another new blueprint class, but I wanna go to miscellaneous and then select data asset. And when I do this, like when we created data table, we're presented with a menu that asks us to pick a class for our data asset instance. So let's do our P card info, and let's create our first card, and it was the Spear Warrior. So let's do DA underscore Spear Warrior. And if we look in our chosen deck, our Spear Warrior had attack of 3, health of 6, and the card art of Spear Warrior. So let's open this up, and we can see that we just have access to those variables that we set. So we can set the name, the attack, the health, and then we will find the right card art. And if we go back to our BP card, we can create a new variable called card data, we'll call it, so it's not the same as card info. And we can set the variable type to P card info. And when we click on our card data variable, we can see that it's just asking for one value to be passed into that variable. And when we click this drop down, we can see that our Spear Warrior is available for us to select. So now this variable is set to this data asset. So we don't need to guess on what the different values were, we can just set it directly. And similarly, if we go to our game instance, we can create a new variable here, and I'll just call this one chosen deck data. And for the variable type here, I'm gonna select our P card info. And in this array, I can add an element, and I can just add my Spear Warrior to that. So I'm just gonna create the data assets for the rest of my cards now. And so now I have data assets for each of my cards, the Lightning Mage, Fire Mage, Hardened Warrior, and Spear Warrior. And so now in my game instance, I can add a bunch of extra cards, and then it's really easy to just select the ones that I want for my deck. And so now I have an array of all these data assets as my deck instead. So this is much easier to manage from a data perspective. We don't have to worry about getting the wrong data in. We don't have to worry about searching from a data table list. So I can go ahead and delete that. And then here in my game mode, I can just find that chosen deck data, pass this into my for each loop instead. And then in my card, I can make this card data instance editable and expose on spawn and refresh my node. And now I can see that I can pull in this from that. And now all I need to do is just change where I was setting the card information from the struct, change it to pull from that data asset instead. And so here I can just pull it in, and all of the variables can be grabbed directly from the data asset. So I can say card art and get the card art variable directly instead of having to pull down the whole struct to find the one value that I need. So this also is a little bit cleaner because we don't have these break structs all over our blueprint. So here I can delete this one, pull in my card data, and I'll get attack and get health, and that will pass it directly into this widget. And then in the construction script, I'm setting my card art from the card data instead. So now when I press play, I should see the data from this array instead of the other array. So there we have our hardened warrior, we have our lightning mage, spear warrior. Now, data assets aren't the right tool for every job. In some ways, a struct could be better. So I've prepared this list of pros and cons so you can compare the advantages and disadvantages of using a data asset or a struct. So these are just some general guidelines on when I think a data asset is the better choice over a struct. So if your data needs to reference engine assets, I think that data assets are probably the better choice. In our case, when we were trying to get access to the card art, or if you were trying to access a specific mesh for something like an inventory system, I think a data asset may be a better choice for you. If you want your designers to be able to create new assets or edit values in an asset without really needing to code, I think the data asset system is much better for game designers that don't have that background in coding. If you want to be able to push out a change to an asset and have that affect all of the existing data assets in the project, then a data asset is superior to a struct. For instance, if we wanted to make a change to how all of the cards in our game operate, we could do that using data assets, but it may be a little bit more complicated using a struct. And when data represents a large majority of your game systems, or it encompasses a majority of how a system works, I think a data asset is better. But like I said, I think that there are some instances where you would still want to use a struct. If you need many instances of similar data but not the same data, a struct gives you the flexibility to make changes, whereas a data asset can only be spawned as one thing. And also if the data must vary between instances, so for these first two, I think of like an inventory system where you're spawning new items, but these items are randomized, so you would never get the same item twice. You may still want to lean toward a struct so you can modify those individual values, because with a data asset, you would not be able to modify those values. If you want to have large tables of data, you still want to use a struct because we can use those data tables. And with data assets, there really isn't something similar to a data table. The only viable solution that I could find would be having something that holds a list of all of the data assets in your game and something like an array. Now, data assets are also slightly more resource intensive than a struct. So if you have large amounts of data that's being passed around in your game, you may still want to lean on a struct because it's a little bit lighter on the engine. If you're implementing component-based systems like an inventory system or an equipment system, you may still want to use a struct because then you can have a different struct tied to each of those components. And similarly, when data is tied to specific objects, you may still want to use a struct. Or when you're trying to optimize the amount of memory usage, a struct will take up slightly less memory, so you may want to lean that way. So hopefully now you can see the benefits of using data assets for something like this in a card game. And I really think this will streamline your development and allow the creation of new cards much easier. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe and join the Discord where you can interact with other developers and see some of the cool projects that we're working on. Thanks for watching.